Welcome back to the Human Project. It's May 9th, 2025. The events in Moscow are just wrapping up, at least I imagine they are. And Ibrahim Traore appears to have been the star of the show, and I think deliberately, well, as part of his personal charisma. I think that the other leaders there wanted to welcome him on that level, particularly Maduro of Venezuela and the presidents of Russia and China. So this represents not just Traore personally, but as I was saying in a previous episode, the emergence of Africa as a geopolitical reality in a way that it hasn't before. And this has tremendous implications across the board for the whole struggle against colonialism and just the balance of forces in today's world. So I wanted to say more about that, but I'm going to set that aside. And then the other thing I was planning to talk about was continuing some stuff I was saying about Hegel and the question of temporalities, very abstract theoretical stuff. But I wound up kind of in the middle. And I want to introduce that by talking a little about myself personally. I was a political activist. I was raised in a political family. I was an activist in the 60s and 70s. Then somewhere around running around, printing up leaflets, going door to door, going to demonstrations, this, that, the other thing. Then at a certain point, I decided that my main talent is in the realm of theory, and that theoretical work needs to be done. It's a valid form of political activity. So I turned my attention there, just to the study of Marxism, the study of theories in general, and particularly I got connected with Lucien Sèvres, the French Marxist philosopher, whom I consider the most important Marxist thinker since Marx himself. And guess what? He's not very well known. And so I wanted to devote some time to the question of how do things get to be known? How do theoretical models get to be known? How does this work? Is it just sort of happens? Can I write a book and, hey, next thing I know, it'll be in all the universities and whatnot? I don't think so. So I want to give the example because we're going to be looking for ways of thinking. It's kind of an active quest, and unfortunately, even Marxism has come to be primarily in the domain of academia. So if it's influenced by the forces that influence academia, at least in the West. I don't know now China, Russia, Cuba may be different. But let me give you the example of Foucault and post-structuralism. Now, the standard previous model of what I call bourgeois thought, not referring to bourgeois in some kind of, sociological sense, but just in the Marxist sense of the bourgeois era, the capitalist era. So the form of thought, most characteristic of the capitalist era. Now, that way of thinking is kind of falling apart, and it has been for really since the late 1800s, with the advent of, various forms of, advances in physics, various forms of relativism, and then the philosophies of, Heidegger in particular, who wanted to provide a philosophical foundation for the changes in the advances in physics. So Heidegger was very influential. I'll maybe discuss him another time. And then he had a tremendous influence on, more than influence, that really the post-structuralists really derived from Heidegger in a way that they often or never acknowledged. So how did this come about? How come my mentor, Lucien Sèvres, was virtually unknown, whereas Foucault, who he and Sèvres were contemporaries at the highest levels of academia in Paris. How come everybody in the entire world knew Foucault? So I once at the university near where I lived in Berkeley, went to a talk by Foucault. He used to visit every summer and give talks or run classes. I didn't go to a class. I just gave a talk. I went to one of his talks. So, okay, it was interesting. But he spent a lot of time whining about how, he's so marginalized. His ideas are marginal. He's marginal. Everything about him is marginal. So, okay, I didn't totally agree with that. So anyway, I was walking back to where I parked the car, and across the street from the university is this bookstore, the University Press bookstore, that specializes in books published by university presses. So on the occasion of Foucault's visit, they had done up the entire window display and front two tables with Foucault's books. And he had been translated into, you name the language, it had put out Foucault. And every word that came out of his typewriter, I think this was before computers, immediately, no sooner was the ink dry than it was translated into, 25,000 languages. So I'm thinking, wow, I could use a little bit of marginalization like that. I really feel sorry for this guy. And just the contrast between Foucault and Lucien Sèvres, a really important Marxist thinker who I'm going to start devoting more time to at a certain point on this series. It couldn't be more of a contrast, and as I said, particularly since they both came from the same École Normale Supérieure in Paris. So one went one way, the other went the other way. How did that happen? We need to look at this, and it's unfortunate that Marxist work, is the domain of academia. So who shapes academia? Who decides what gets known, what gets not known? And there's been plenty of evidence that these decisions are being made not just in your local friendly academic department, but there's influence coming down from elsewhere. And with Foucault, we could point out that Mr. Marginalization was soon appointed to the highest academic honor and level in France. And I think with that, you get paid and you just to think, and once in a while to, have a couple of students write your books. The highest level, even above that École Normale Supérieure where Louis Althusser was. It's like, wow, how did that happen? Who made that decision? And in his talk, when he began that tenure, he openly said that his task, his mission, was to provide the younger generation with an alternative to Marxism. Well, by some miraculous process, Foucault, the postmodern, post-structuralism, postmodernism being cranked out there in France, spread throughout the world and to academic departments in the most remote corners of what we call now the global South. I'm sure it was all over Africa, it was all over Latin America, India. How did that happen? How did that happen that this mode of thought got so influential? And even the ways of thinking of Marxism were these structuralist, postmodernist ways of thinking Marxism, as though Marxism itself isn't good enough because nobody's being paid to actually develop Marxist thought itself. And again, speaking personally, I functioned my whole life outside of the academic world, partly because I knew that I couldn't put up with the restrictions. The downside of that is it took until, the age I'm at now for me to really have time to do the work that I want to do. But it's important to look at this because the models of bourgeois thought, they're falling apart. And I don't know what's going on in academia, how actively people are searching for, okay, what's the next hot thing, the new paradigm. And, of course, the first thing they do is start combining all the old things that, are on their way out, thinking if they could sort of plug them in different ways, that they can make it work. But I'm pretty sure people are going to be looking for a new paradigm. In my humble opinion, and it's not just mine, this comes from Lenin, who was really a genius in so many areas. Lenin's book, Materialism and Imperial Criticism, is a fundamental analysis and critique of 20th century bourgeois philosophy. This was before Heidegger, but he's critiquing, what's his name? I can't remember his name right now, who was, preceded Heidegger as a philosopher of science. It'll come back to me in a minute. But anyway, Lenin is saying there's no place for bourgeois thought to go once it falls apart. The next mode of thought is Marxism, materialist dialectics. There is no other choice. And so we can look at, in the future, I'll have much more to say about post-structuralism. But in a way, I've seen it, it obviously was very successful for a while as a paradigm, as a thought model, cranked out, zillions of volumes of academic, thought in all areas, comp lit, sociology, psychology, this, that. But I think, in my opinion, deriving from Lenin, it's kind of the last gasp of bourgeois thought, and in particular the thought deriving from Immanuel Kant. So it gets bogged down in more and more relativism, that we can't really know reality, we're just making up reality out of our heads. I'll get into all this in more detail. I'm just sort of making a general point now, that we need to be attentive to where theoretical models are coming from, because we can be sure that somebody right now is trying to cook up the next paradigm that'll sweep the academic world all over the place, because it'll be hot and it'll be sexy, and it's like, well, just like post-structuralism. And it'll attract a lot of thinkers who, really for various reasons, intellectual or the politics of their department and who's signing their paychecks, they can't just turn to Marxism. So they have to jump on, here's the next 20 years of academic thought. I can crank out a bunch of books on this and so on. And we need to be conscious of that. And we need to be conscious of how we're thinking, what modes of thought we're operating within. Because this resurgence, and again, to tie it in the other direction, the resurgence of Africa really does represent the end of the entire way of thinking represented by so-called Western civilization, and more particularly by the colonialism, a way of thinking that supports subjugation, repression, inequality. And so dialectical thinking, which sees everything as process, everything as temporality, and so on and so forth, isn't conducive to subjugation, dehumanization, repression. And so this battle is going to be front and center, because as I said in a previous episode, the elites of our world are going to make every effort to subjugate us and turn us into robots. And that's happening right now, to dehumanize ourselves. So the more we can be running around not knowing who we are as humans, and not knowing what's valid thinking and what's not valid thinking, and accepting dehumanized ways of thinking, then that supports those efforts. And when we fight against that and try to come up with an alternative way of thought, and in my humble opinion, what we're calling Marxism is the only alternative way of thought, and it is the thought of humanity, becoming human. That's what it is. Now here I have to be a little critical of Marxism, because it hasn't really lived up to its mission. It sort of just keeps repeating the same old truths. Now in economics, that's great, because we need that. But in other areas, it's just okay already. You've said it, historical materialism, dialectical materialism, keep repeating the same thing. But what we need is original thought. We need to bring Marxism alive to become a living way of thinking that's actually producing new ideas, and the ideas that we need for the times we're living in. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it here. And in a way, this is another introduction to this whole series and what my intent is and what it's about. But again, speaking personally, it meant a lot to me to believe that my work as a theorist has a place in the political world. And I believe that more than ever, because I believe that when we see the global South and the new modes of being, they're going to require new ways of thinking. And the current leadership may or may not be capable of that. And so it may be the younger people who are going to be looking for that. And again, to repeat myself, you can bet that the academic world all over the world is going to be trying to influence the ways of thinking of the next generation in their interests. Okay, that's it for today.